Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, those between and beyond the binary. My name's Colin, and his bedtime brother. Oh boy, I got my costume on this time. I even got my little cup of water here. The candles are lit, the fire is set, and it still looks so bright in here because that glorious, beautiful sunshine is blasting in through the kitchen window. How are you? Hi, everybody. There's been some fun little banter in the chat already. Cat Eyes Lucas got a cool podcast from the sounds of it called the Ink Guild Podcast. That's rad. I'll check it out. And I imagine Lance will too. Lance might not be one to toot his own horn, but he's recently, well, I don't know how recently. Have you finished the draft of your book yet, Lance? I know that I can't remember if you were close the last time we chatted about it at Remedy or not, but Lance is something of a writer himself, so I'm sure that he would appreciate it as well. And yes, Red Swan Pizza, shout out, they rule. Their food is so good. They do this kind of like, East Indian fusion sort of style. Like you can get a palak paneer pizza. And yeah, the sesame seeds are a real bonus. I hope everybody else has had a really lovely day. It's been great weather up here in Edmonton, if a little odd, quite blustery. I made it to the grocery store and was largely successful in procuring everything I need except for refried beans, which you think should be easy enough to find. But I scoured that bean shelf and there wasn't even a spot for them there. So I anticipate that I was probably just missing something. And in retrospect, I probably should have asked one of the employees to help me because that's what they're there for. Nevertheless, we've got some food stocked up and made some absolutely smashing potatoes last night. A little bit of Greek salad. Delicious stuff. How are all of you doing? Still farting around with it, but it's essentially done. That's awesome, Lance. Congratulations. I'm excited to get eyes on it when it's finally ready for public consumption. My furniture is moving on its own. A pillow just. I mean, I don't know if I hope that it's full of something alive or if it's possessed, but I'm gonna err on the side of caution and not look too hard at it lest I rile up whatever is hiding in there. Was I looking exclusively on the bean shelf or did I check the Mexican cuisine section of shelves? So I was in the Mexican cuisine section because I got salsa. I found the salsa and it never occurred to me to look there for the refried beans. That's an excellent tip, Marin. Life lessons from Marin Shea, everybody. Yeah, it never even occurred to me. I guess it is sort of it's a processed bean dish, native to Mexico. At any rate, enough about my pantry. We've got a story tonight, a lovely little story called Prince Caspian by Clive Staples Lewis, the one and only. And we are very near the end. In fact, this will be the penultimate chapter of our foray into the fourth book of Narnia here. When we last left our adventurers, let's see, what was going on? That's right, they had convened to host a council regarding what to do about this whole sort of stalemate thing. King Miraz's army is swole, it's thick, it's huge, they're super buff. What about the beans that sprouted, Colin? That's right, our beans are sprouting, everybody, and they look robust. They're imposing figures as they muscle their way out from under the earth, like me in the late morning coming out from under the covers. It's time to grow and be alive. So we're very excited for the beans. The radishes are also plugging along, doing very well. No wildflowers yet, but I'm sure they'll turn up eventually. Nevertheless, last night we learned that the plan of attack was to challenge Miraz, the sometime protector of Narnia, Lord Protector, to single combat, hoping that they can goad him into single combat with the High King Peter, who has had his full depth and breadth of nobility returned to him by virtue of his short stint back in Narnia. He's no longer an English schoolboy waiting to return to charter school. He's large and in charge once again, as he was so many hundreds of years ago. They weren't sure that it was going to work. But as it turns out, two of of King Miraz's lords, Lord Caspian and Lord Glozell, weren't too fond of their captain either, and used a little bit of the old reverse psychology to insinuate that their king would be a coward if he did not accept the challenge, despite the fact that he is very likely to lose to who is effectively, King Alexander the Great come back from the olden days, or Gilgamesh or something, as fairy tale champion who has returned to life inexplicably. The beans are on the move. Yeah, much like the Ents. There was some lovely little banter about who would act as marshals for the combat, with the decision being made to allow Bulgy Bear himself the honor of upholding his old privilege. I guess this was one of the things that was standard practice back in the golden age of Narnia, that the bears would be allowed a place at the duel. And Glenstorm was also invited, and who was the third? Reepicheep, the most ostentatious mouse we have yet to encounter in Narnia, was very keen to be a member of it. But it turns out it's Giant Wimbleweather and the bear and the centaur Glenstorm. We'll see if Reepicheep gets his due at some point. Yes, the bulgy bear, that paw-sucking K-group mammal. And that's where we left it off. So, sit back, relax, put your feet up, put your hands up. Don't do that last one. Just relax, enjoy. It's story time, everybody. Chapter 14. How all were very busy. A little before 2 o'clock, Trumpkin and the Badger sat with the rest of the creatures at the wood's edge, looking across at the gleaming line of Miraz's army, which was now about 2 arrow shots away. In between, a square space of level grass had been staked for the combat. At the 2 far corners stood Glozell and Caspian with drawn swords. At the near corners were Giant Wimbleweather and the Bulgy Bear, who, in spite of all their warnings, was sucking his paws. God, Bulgy Bear, you're an embarrassment. And looking, to tell the truth, uncommonly silly. Well, no duh, he is a Winnie the Pooh after all. You were right, chat. Yesterday we had a vote, and it turned out everybody thought that Bulgy Bear would in fact suck his paws. I had a little bit of a doubt. I had some faith in the fellow, and turns out that was extremely misplaced. Bulgy Bear, shame on you. Shame on you, Bulgy Bear. To make up for this, Glenstorm, on the right of the lists, stood stock still, except when he was stamping a hoof occasionally on the turf, looking much more imposing than the Telmarine Baron who faced him on the left. Nice work, Glenstorm, picking up the slack. Peter had just shaken hands with Edmund and the doctor, and was now walking down to the combat. It was like the moment before the pistol goes at an important race, but very much worse. "I wish Aslan had turned up before it came to this," said Trumpkin. "So do I," said Truffle Hunter. "But look behind you." "Crows and crockery," muttered the dwarf as soon as he had done so. "What are they? Huge people, beautiful people, like gods and goddesses and giants. Hundreds and thousands of them closing in behind us. What are they?" "It's the Dryads and Hamadryads and Sylvans," said Truffle Hunter. "Aslan has waked them." "Humph," said the dwarf. "That'll be very useful if the enemy try any treachery. But it won't help the High King very much if Miraz proves handier with his sword." The Badger said nothing. For now Peter and Miraz were entering the lists from opposite ends, both on foot, both in chain shirts, with helmets and shields. They advanced till they were close together. Both bowed and seemed to speak, but it was impossible to hear what they had said. Next moment, the 2 swords flashed in the sunlight. For a second, the clash could be heard, but it was immediately drowned, because both armies began shouting like crowds at a football match. "Well done, Peter! Oh, well done!" shouted Edmund as he saw Miraz reel back a whole pace and a half. "Follow it up, quick!" And Peter did. And for a few seconds it looked as if the fight might be won. But then Miraz pulled himself together, began to make real use of his height and weight. "Miraz! Miraz! The king! The king!" came the roar of the Telmarines. Caspian and Edmund grew white with sickening anxiety. "Peter is taking some dreadful knocks," said Edmund. "Hello," said Caspian. "What's happening now?" "Both falling apart," said Edmund. "A bit blown, I expect. Watch. Ah, now they're beginning again, more scientifically this time, circling round and round, feeling each other's defenses."
"I'm afraid this Miraz knows his work," muttered the doctor.
But hardly had he said this, when there was such a clapping and baying and throwing up of hoods among the old Narnians that it was nearly deafening.
"What is it? What was it?" asked the doctor. "My old mice missed it."
"The High King has pricked him in the armpit," said Caspian, still clapping, "just where the armhole of the hauberk lets the point through. First blood!" First blood, for the Halo fans out there. "It's looking ugly again now, though," said Edmund. "Peter's not using his shield properly. He must be hurt in the left arm." It was only too true. Everyone could see that Peter's shield hung limp. The shouting of the Telmarines redoubled. "You've seen more battles than I," said Caspian. "Is there any chance now?" "Precious little," said Edmund. "I suppose he might just do it, with luck." "Oh, why did we let it happen at all?" said Caspian. Suddenly, all the shouting on both sides died down. Edmund was puzzled for a moment. Then he said, "Oh, I see. They've both agreed to arrest. Come on, Doctor. You and I may be able to do something for the High King." They ran down to the lists, and Peter came outside the ropes to meet them, his face red and sweaty, his chest heaving. Oh, ding, ding, everybody. Here we have a most excellent rendition of the fight from the Narnians' perspective. You can see Peter, the High King, as well as King Miraz, looking rather more fearsome than I expected him to be honest. I was imagining a bit of an old doddering graybeard, but it seems that he's not quite past his prime yet. And in the foreground we have all the lovely animals of Narnia. There's Wimbleweather, looking rather giantish. Oh, dang, and there's Bulgy Bear, sucking on not one but two paws at the same time on the very, well, it's on the right side of the screen for me. I don't know if it's on the right side of the page. I don't know if it's reversed for you. At any rate, Bulgy Bear, my God, what a disgrace. Welcome, Colleen, Frank, and Mulric. Glad to have you in time for the first, well, I guess there was the battle the other night with the sorcery and the revenge and all that. Nevertheless, we soldier on. "Is your left arm wounded?" asked Edmund. "It's not exactly a wound," Peter said. "I got the full weight of his shoulder on my shield, like a load of bricks, and the rim of the shield drove down into my wrist. I don't think it's broken, but it might be a sprain. If you could tie it up very tight, I think I could manage." While they were doing this, Edmund asked anxiously, "What do you think of him, Peter?" "Tough," said Peter. "Very tough. I have a chance if I can keep him on the hop till his weight and short wind come against him, in this hot sun, too. To tell the truth, I haven't much chance else. Give my love to everyone at home, Ed, if he gets me. Here he comes into the lists again. So long, old chap. Goodbye, Doctor. And I say, Ed, say something really nice to Trumpkin. He's been a brick. And as we all know, it's good to be a brick." Edmund couldn't speak. He walked back with the doctor to his own lines with a sick feeling in his stomach. But the new bout went well. Peter now seemed to be able to make some use of his shield, and he certainly made good use of his feet. He was almost playing Tig with Miraz now, keeping out of range, shifting his ground, making the enemy work. "Coward!" booed the Telmarines. "Why don't you stand up to him? Don't you like it, eh? Thought you'd come to fight, not dance. Ha! "Oh, I do hope he won't listen to them," said Caspian. "Not he," said Edmund. "You don't know him." "Oh!" For Miraz had got in a blow at last on Peter's helmet. Peter staggered, slipped sideways, and fell on one knee. The roar of the Telmarines rose like the noise of the sea. "Now, Miraz!" they yelled. "Now! Quick, quick! Kill him!" But indeed there was no need to egg the usurper on. He was on top of Peter already. Edmund bit his lips till the blood came, as the sword flashed down on Peter. It looked as if it would slash off his head. Thank heavens, it had glanced down his right shoulder. The dwarf-wrought mail was sound and did not break. "Great Scott!" cried Edmund. "He's up again! Peter, go it, Peter!" "I couldn't see..." different dwarf.
"I couldn't see what happened," said the dwarf. "How did he do it?"
"Grabbed Miraz's arm as it came down," said Trumpkin, dancing with delight. "There's a man for you. Uses his enemy's arm as a ladder. Ha ha! The High King! The High King! Up, old Narnia!" "Look," said Trufflehunter. "Miraz is angry. It is good." They were certainly at it, hammer and tongs now. Such a flurry of blows that it seemed impossible for either not to be killed. As the excitement grew, the shouting almost died away. The spectators were holding their breath. It was most horrible and most magnificent. A great shout arose from the old Narnians. Miraz was down, not struck by Peter, but face downward, having tripped on a tussock. Peter stepped back, waiting for him to rise. "Oh, bother, bother, bother," said Edmund to himself. "Need he be as gentlemanly as that? I suppose he must. Comes of being a knight and a high king. I suppose it is what Aslan would like. But that brute will be up again in a minute, and then..." But that brute never rose. The lords Glozell and Caspian had their own plans ready. As soon as they saw their king down, they leapt into the lists, crying, "Treachery! Treachery! The Narnian traitor has stabbed him in the back while he lay helpless. To arms! To arms, Telmar!" Peter hardly understood what was happening. He saw two big men running toward him with drawn swords. Then the third Telmarine had leapt over the ropes on his left. "To arms, Narnia! Treachery!" Peter shouted. If all three had set upon him at once, he would never have spoken again. But Glozell stopped to stab his own king dead where he lay. "That's for your insult this morning." No, that was Caspian. "My Glozell, you traitorous... Ooh, I got some choice words for you. Probably can't say them here, though. Sorry, kiddies." But Glozell stopped to stab his own king dead where he lay. "That's for your insult this morning," he whispered as the blade went home. Peter swung to face Caspian, slashed his legs from under him, and, with the back cut of his same stroke, walloped off his head. Edmund was now at his side, crying, "Narnia! Narnia, the lion!" The whole Telmarine army was rushing toward them. But now the giant was stamping forward, stooping low and swinging his club. The centaurs charged. Twang, twang behind, and hiss, hiss overhead came the archery of dwarves. Trumpkin was fighting at his left. Full battle was joined. "Come back, Reepicheep, you little ass!" shouted Peter. "You'll only be killed! This is no place for mice!" But the ridiculous little creature was dancing in and out among the feet of both armies, jabbing with their swords. Many a Telmarine warrior that day felt his foot suddenly pierced as if by a dozen skewers, hopped on one leg cursing the pain, and fell as often as not. If he fell, the mice finished him off. If he did not, someone else did. Oh man, what a way to go. Death by 1,000 pricks. Ugh, no thank you. But almost before the old Narnians were really warmed to their work, they found the enemy giving way. Tough-looking warriors turned white, gazed in terror, not on the old Narnians, but on something behind them, and then flung down their weapons, shrieking, "The wood! The wood! The end of the world!" But soon neither their cries nor the sound of weapons could be heard any more, for both were drowned in the ocean-like roar of the awakened trees, as they plunged through the ranks of Peter's army, and then on in pursuit of the Telmarines. Have you ever stood at the edge of a great wood on a high ridge, when a wild southwester broke over it in full fury on an autumn evening? Imagine that sound. And then imagine that the wood, instead of being fixed to one place, was rushing at you, and was no longer trees, but huge people, yet still like trees, because their long arms waved like branches, and their heads tossed, and leaves fell round them in showers. It was like that for the Telmarines. It was a little alarming even for the Narnians. In a few minutes, all Miraz's followers were running down to the great river in the hope of crossing the bridge to the town of Baruna, and there defending themselves behind ramparts and closed gates. They reached the river, but there was no bridge. It had disappeared since yesterday. Then utter panic and horror fell upon them, and they all surrendered. But what had happened to the bridge? Early that morning, after a few hours' sleep, the girls had waked to see Aslan standing over them and to hear his voice saying, "We will make holiday." They rubbed their eyes and looked round them. Aslan's a party creature all of a sudden, a party animal, if you will. They rubbed their eyes and looked round them. The trees had all gone, but could still be seen moving away towards Aslan's howe in a dark mass. Bacchus and the Maenads, his fierce, madcap girls, and Silenus were still with them. Lucy, fully rested, jumped up. Everyone was awake. Everyone was laughing. Flutes were playing, cymbals clashing. Animals, not talking animals, were crowding in upon them from every direction. "What is it, Aslan?" said Lucy, her eyes dancing and her feet wanting to dance. "Come, children," said he, "ride on my back again today." "Oh, lovely!" cried Lucy, and both girls climbed on to the warm golden back as they had done no one knew how many years before. Then the whole party moved off, Aslan leading, Bacchus and his Maenads leaping, rushing, and turning somersaults, the beasts frisking round them, and Silenus and his donkey bringing up the rear. They turned a little to the right, raced down a steep hill, and found the long bridge of Baruna in front of them. Before they had begun to cross it, however, up out of the water came a great, wet, bearded head, larger than a man's, crowned with rushes. It looked at Aslan, and out of its mouth came a deep voice. "Hail, Lord," it said, "loose my chains." "Who on earth is that?" whispered Susan. "I think it's the river god, but hush," said Lucy. "Bacchus," said Aslan, "deliver him from his chains." "That means the bridge, I expect," thought Lucy. And so it did. Bacchus and his people splashed forward into the shallow water, and a minute later the most curious thing began happening. Great, strong trunks of ivy came curling up all the piers of the bridge, growing as quickly as a fire grows, wrapping the stones round, splitting, breaking, separating them. The walls of the bridge turned into hedges gay with hawthorn for a moment, and then disappeared, as the whole thing, with a rush and a rumble, collapsed into the swirling water. With much splashing, screaming, and laughter, the revelers waded or swam or danced across the ford. "Hurrah! It's the ford of Baruna again now!" cried the girls, and up the bank on the far side, and into the town. Everyone in the streets fled before their faces. The first house they came to was a school. A girls' school, where a lot of Narnian girls, with their hair done very tight, and ugly tight collars round their necks, and thick tickly stockings on their legs, were having a history lesson. The sort of history that was taught in Narnia under Miraz's rule was duller than the truest history you ever read, and less true than the most exciting adventure story. "If you don't attend, Gwendolen," said the mistress, "and stop looking out of the window, I shall have to give you an order mark." "But please, Miss Prizzle," began Gwendolen. "Did you hear what I said, Gwendolen?" asked Miss Prizzle. "Oh, but please, Miss Prizzle," said Gwendolen, "there's a lion." "Take 2 order marks for talking nonsense," said Miss Prizzle. "What the heck is an order mark?" "And now—" A roar interrupted her. Ivy came curling in at the windows of the classroom. The walls became a mass of shimmering green, and leafy branches arched overhead where the ceiling had been. Miss Prizzle found she was standing on grass in a forest glade. She clutched at her desk to steady herself, and found that the desk was a rose bush. Wild people, such as she had never even imagined, were crowding round her. Then she saw the lion, screamed and fled, and with her fled her class, who were mostly dumpy, prim little girls with fat legs. Gwendolen hesitated. "You'll stay with us, sweetheart," said Aslan. "Oh, may I? Thank you, said Gwendolen. Instantly she joined hands with 2 of the Maenads, who whirled her round in a merry dance, and helped her take off some of the unnecessary and uncomfortable clothes that she was wearing. Back a page, we can see the head of the river god, looking like me after one of my marathon baths, rising from the surface of the river, and the Maenads and the girls, and all the dancing beasts, hot-footing it across the water to go do the work of uncivilizing that town of Baruna. Focus. Well, that's about as we're going to get with this one, I think. You'll just have to use your imaginations, everybody. Wherever they went in the little town of Baruna, it was the same. Most of the people fled. A few joined them. When they left the town, they were a larger and a merrier company. They swept on across the level fields in the north bank or left bank of the river. At every farm, animals came out to join them. Sad old donkeys, who had never known joy, grew suddenly young again. Chained dogs broke their chains. Horses kicked their carts to pieces and came trotting along with them, clop, clop, kicking up the mud and whinnying. At a well in a yard they met a man who was beating a boy. The stick burst into flour in the man's hand. He tried to drop it, but it stuck to his hand. His arm became a branch, his body the trunk of a tree. His feet took root. The boy, who had been crying a moment before, burst out laughing and joined them. Man, that's horrifying. Aslan is going full Hieronymus Bosch on this poor little town. Here we can see this misguided, abusive father being condemned to a sorry fate. Indeed. At a little town halfway to Beaversdom, where 2 rivers met, they came to another school, where a tired-looking girl was teaching arithmetic to a number of boys who looked very like pigs. She looked out of the window and saw the divine revelers singing up the street, and a stab of joy went through her heart. Aslan stopped right under the window and looked up at her. "Oh, don't, she said. "I'd love to, but I mustn't. I must stick to my work, and the children would be frightened if they saw you." "Frightened?" said the most pig-like of the boys. "Who's she talking to out of the window? Let's tell the inspector she talks to people out of the window when she ought to be teaching us." "Let's go and see who it is," said another boy. and they all came crowding to the window. But as soon as their mean little faces looked out, Bacchus gave a great cry of, "You on, you on, you oi, oi, oi!" And all the boys all began howling with fright and trampling one another down to get out of the door and jumping out of the windows. And it was said thereafter, whether truly or not, that those particular little boys were never seen again, but that there were a lot of very fine little pigs in that part of the country which had never been there before. Man, get transmogrified, you little turds. "Now, dear heart," said Aslan to the mistress, and she jumped down and joined them. At Beaver's Dam they recrossed the river and came east again along the southern bank. They came to a little cottage, where a child stood in the doorway crying. "Why are you crying, my love?" asked Aslan. The child, who had never seen a picture of a lion, was not afraid of him. "Auntie's very ill," she said. "She's going to die." Then Aslan went to go in at the door of the cottage, but it was too small for him. So, when he had got his head through, he pushed with his shoulders. Lucy and Susan fell off when he did this, and lifted the whole house up, and it fell backward and apart. And there, still in her bed, though the bed was now in the open air, lay a little old woman who looked as if she had dwarf blood in her. She was at death's door, but when she opened her eyes and saw the bright, hairy head of the lion staring into her face, she did not scream or faint. She said, "Oh, Aslan, I knew it was true. I've been waiting for this all my life. Have you come to take me away?" "Yes, dearest," said Aslan, "but not the long journey yet." And as he spoke, like the flush creeping along the underside of a cloud at sunrise, the color came back to her white face, and her eyes grew bright, and she sat up and said, "Why, I do declare I feel that better. I think I could take a little breakfast this morning." "Here you are, mother," said Bacchus, dipping a pitcher in the cottage well and handing it to her. But what was in it was not water, but the richest wine, red as red currant jelly, smooth as oil, strong as beef, warming as tea, cool as dew. That's how I like my wine, as strong as beef. "Hey, you've done something to our well," said the old woman. "That makes a nice change, that does." And she jumped out of bed. She's on the pandemic diet. Wine for breakfast. "Ride on me," said Aslan, and added to Susan and Lucy, "You two queens will have to run now." "But we'd like that just as well," said Susan, and off they went again. And so at last, with leaping and dancing and singing, with music and laughter and roaring and barking and neighing, they all came to the place where Miraz's army stood, flinging down their swords and holding up their hands, and Peter's army, still holding their weapons and breathing hard, stood round them with stern, glad faces. And the first thing that happened was that the old woman slipped off Aslan's back and ran across to Caspian, and they embraced one another, for she was his old nurse. Oh, my heart. Oh. And so concludes the penultimate chapter of Prince Caspian. Woo-wee! Oh, guys, it's a happy ending after all. This must have been one of C.S. Lewis's visions for the second coming, with everybody getting their just desserts in a very fitting fashion, and all of the poor, beleaguered, but sincere and pure people being welcomed into the fold of God, Cat, Lion Man's arms. And, now presumably they get to party forever and ever. And that's exactly what heaven is like. You get to wake up and drink as much wine as you want. You don't have to wear itchy wool stockings. You can dance if you want to. You can leave your friends behind. You can bring your friends, but if your friends don't dance, they're probably not getting into Aslan's heaven. Dancing is a virtue, everybody. I hope you take a chance to bust a move sometime soon. Dang. Well, shoot. I guess we've just got the one more chapter left tomorrow night, folks. What do you think? As much bacon as you want? Oh, yes. Bacon. My goodness. I almost bought some bacon at the grocery store today, but instead I bought more Smokies so we can grill them up, do some more hot dogs. What a chapter. You said it, Sam. That had everything. Like the battle, the pitched fever, the celebration, the joy, the heartwarming reunion at the end. The only thing that's sort of missing is a romantic interest, and I don't really mind that at all. Even Reepicheep and his Mouseketeers got to prove their mettle and show that they're not just good for frightening elephants and distributing hantavirus. So it looks as though all is well that ends well. Tomorrow's chapter will presumably be a variety of epilogue. We'll get to hear from everybody. Oh, and then on Monday we will begin with the 5th book. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, everybody. What's going on in chat? This story does stand the test of time. It was a good chapter, says Mulrick. Yes, it was. Gracious. Well, the sun is still decidedly up over here, but don't let that fool you, folks. It's bedtime. So I hope the rest of your day continues to wind down and you enjoy your evening as night encroaches, the restorative and quiet, peaceful cool of the evening. May it bring you many pleasant dreams and invigorate the nerves and bones of your body and the nerves and bones of your soul, if souls have bones. Soul bones. Good night, moon, and good night, stars. Good night, trucks, and good night, cars. Good night, shoes, and good night, hats. Good night, dogs, and good night, cats. Good night, friends, and good night, family. Good night to you, and good night to me. Sweet dreams, everybody. Have a great sleep.